Awesome. Look, we'll get underway. Look, it's great to have you all on tonight, and I'm super happy to have Michael with us. And I saw Michael present at an IASP meeting, and his knowledge and insight into and passion towards male suicide is really inspiring, and male health, and thought it'd be great to have him on here tonight. And I'll let him give an introduction to himself and talk about some of the research that he's doing. But Michael, so good to have you here tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here, and yeah, great to meet you all. There's a few familiar faces, I think, from maybe a meeting that we had a little while ago, but yeah, great to meet some new people as well.
Good stuff. Well, before we jump into your research, I'd like to know about running and what got you into running and what keeps you running. I love running myself, and I'm always inspired to hear people's journeys, or what it is that got you into it.
Well, I suppose I got into it out of necessity more than anything, because it was mainly in the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, because I was living in Melbourne all through that. So we had, some seriously long periods of isolation. And my main means of kind of keeping my mental health in check is always exercise. And so, I would always ride my bike to work, and that was a great way of just getting incidental exercise and keeping myself sane. But obviously, with the transition to working from home all the time, that just completely went out the window. And I just started to notice so quickly how I was just feeling awful, and not just as a function of everything that was going on, but I just felt so sluggish, and it was just awful. So I just thought I need to start doing something new, and just started to run. I don't go far. I wouldn't say I'm a good runner at all. But the feeling like once you start running and you get to a point where you feel like you can just kind of run forever, and your body sort of starts to work a bit harder, and you feel like you could just keep going. It's just a great feeling, and I always feel awesome afterwards. So yeah.
Awesome. I love it. And those endorphins, once they kick in, hard to put them down.
Yeah, I think there's research as well that show, like, into the mental health benefits of exercise, and I'm not certain on it, but I'm sure there's huge studies looking at it in comparison to things like antidepressants. It's just reminded me what people were talking about earlier in terms of antidepressants. And I think a lot of the time exercise, and don't quote me on this, I'm not certain of it, but I think exercise is often deemed as good as, if not better than, antidepressants and things like that. So yeah, something to think about.
I agree.
They definitely have their place for a lot of people, but there's a lot to be said for simple behavioral things like exercise.
Yeah, for sure. So the premise of this network is built on lived experience, and we like to really hear people's stories and hear what it is that drives them in life, what's led them to here. Just wondering if you could just take us through, like, how you would describe yourself and how you got to where you are now, and sort of some of the key events that have led you to being the person you are today.
Yeah, good question. I suppose it's sort of hard to know where to start, but I didn't grow up in Melbourne. I grew up in Geelong. Moved to Melbourne in 2013 when I started uni. And I guess the most formative experience for me that sort of feeds into the person I am today, and also kind of ties in with my own lived experience of suicidal thoughts and things like that, was around the time of my coming out as gay to my friends and family, which was a very strange experience. Would not recommend to anyone. But it just, I think, going through that, and not only obviously telling all my friends and family and everything like that, after having known and sort of repressed that part of my identity for so long, it was really hard. And it got to the point where, I thought I can either tell people and do something about this, or I can, not do anything and have my mental health continue to go downhill, to the point where it was, pretty clear that it was either tell people and potentially get better, or don't tell anyone and potentially act on thoughts of suicide. So Yeah, I think going through that whole experience has really, I guess, helped me to learn that I am resilient and I can get through some really tough experiences. It's also taught me a lot about how prone I am to black and white thinking sometimes. Because yeah, just what I was saying there, like the options in my head were so clear. It was either like tell people and move on potentially, or don't tell people and, you know, go downhill. So yeah, that I guess was a pretty formative experience in a lot of ways. And I think in terms of how I got into mental health research and research focusing on suicide prevention and men's suicide prevention specifically, I studied psychology, so I have a background in psychology, and research is always a big part of those kinds of courses, psychology in particular. So I was always just kind of very interested in mental health and how the brain works and the interaction between the brain and behavior and things like that. So it was, yeah, I guess just a bit of a natural path for me. And I worked at a few different kind of big research institutes, but started at Origin, which is not the energy company, just to clarify. It's a youth mental health organization based in Parkville in Melbourne. So I've been working with Origin and also with Melbourne Uni, because the two are linked, working there since 2018 now, so for the past 5 years or so. We have a gender and social psychiatry program there, and it's kind of all about men's mental health research. It is a youth mental health organization, so we do have like a bit of a focus on young men's mental health, but we're very lucky to be able to do research focusing on men's mental health across the lifespan, because we know that some of the most serious, you know, outcomes of men's mental ill health can really come, you know, across all stages of life, particularly around midlife and kind of later life. So yeah, I love what I do, and I think, yeah, it's great to kind of be able to do research that not only channels my lived experience, but also, you know, exposes me to other great people who I can learn so much from. And yeah, just hearing people's stories and hearing the intricacies and the nuances of their experiences of suicide in whatever form, I think is so important, because so often that is lost in research. Kind of by definition, because research is all about pulling together different people's experiences and kind of looking at patterns and trying to simplify things. But often with something like suicide, I don't think it should be simplified, because it's in the complexity that we can really understand where, you know, we might be able to intervene and keep people safe. So
Complex.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the like overview and where you're at. I'm just wondering, you sort of touched on your research and how that sort of came about to be part of your world at the moment. Just wondering, like, if we came to your research and the landscape around relationship breakdowns, what was it that actually made this topic come to you?
Lots of different reasons, I suppose. In terms of my lived experience, so the main kind of time I experienced suicidal thoughts was around the kind of breakup of my first like actual relationship. And it was pretty awful. Like I realized how I was being treated in that relationship was kind of tantamount to emotional abuse at times. And it was, yeah, just not a good time in the end. And I kind of thought, I was thinking about it, I was like going through, you know, relationship breakdowns and, you know, whether it's a breakup or divorce, it's awful, but it's kind of just a normal part of life. Like it's something that we all experience in various different forms, particularly like through younger years. But I just don't think anyone should ever experience, you know, a breakup to such a horrible extent that they consider taking their own life. I just think that's it, because it's such a universal human normal experience to go through relationships that don't necessarily work out. It just should never get to that point for people. So I guess that was my own personal reason for getting into this space and looking at kind of men's risk of suicide following relationship breakdown specifically. But it also just hasn't really been explored in great depth in the research that's out there focusing on male suicide. Often relationship breakdown and divorce and things like that come up just as a kind of brief mention alongside other risk factors for male suicide. And it's never really, it hasn't really been delved into to try and understand, why is this such a big risk factor for suicide in men? Because it seems like it's one of the biggest. It just comes up time and again, whether it's studies, looking at associations between different categories of marital status and seeing, who's at greatest risk of suicide. Is it married men, divorced men, whatever? Or studies kind of looking at, people reporting what the kind of direct triggers were for their suicide attempts and things like that. Often relationship breakdown is really up there for men. And it's not to say it's not an issue for people of other genders. Like obviously, the data is there for this being a risk factor for suicide, regardless of gender. But I think our work, focuses directly on suicide risk in men, and we try as much as possible to, I guess, amplify the diversity and difference between men to try and understand, who's most at risk, who's most vulnerable, and how can we potentially, understand the complexities of people's identities and the factors that might be, differentiating their risk. If that kind of makes sense. So that's what I've been focusing on for the last little while. I started my PhD program in August last year, and that's through that sort of program of research I'm focusing directly on men's suicide risk after relationship breakdown. So
Yep. Really interesting to hear how you've come into that space. I know for me, when the first time I sort of became aware that relationship breakdown was quite a significant factor was a mate of mine who was working as a counsellor had heard, I think it was Victorian Suicide Register stats that showed this incredible risk for men within the 6-week period of relationship breakdown.
Yep.
So that's just sort of one of the stats that I've become aware of. But so what obviously you're saying there's not been a lot done in this space, but what has been done? What can you share with us?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess what I'm working on at the moment is what's called a systematic review, which is where you essentially do a piece of research on all the other research that's out there and kind of bring together all of their different findings to sort of present, okay, here's the state of the evidence out there regarding the link between relationship breakdown and suicide for men. And what's really coming through in all the studies that I've identified is, I guess, almost like 3 tiers of a link between relationship breakdown and suicide risk in men. And this is, suicide defined across suicidal thoughts, suicide attempt, or death by suicide. So I guess at the most general in terms of the evidence, there's really strong evidence for an association between, as I kind of said before, different categories of marital status and suicide risk in men, whereby I guess divorced or separated men are routinely found to be at much greater risk of death by suicide. The evidence isn't as clear for risk of suicidal thoughts and attempt, but when it comes to death by suicide, it's really clear that, up to 3 to 4 times the risk of suicide. And that's dependent, I guess, on various different factors. Like it seems like age is a factor, where the risk profile kind of changes depending on the age category of men you're looking at. And also the time or I guess the time at which people have occupied that various marital status. So, how long people have been divorced for example. I think, as you alluded to, Jonathan, the risk is highest in the kind of 1 to 2 years post separation, and it kind of tapers off over time. And it's not to say that suicide as well, or suicide risk, doesn't increase in the lead up to relationship breakdown. It definitely does as well. So it's relationship conflict and discord and things like that might be, potentially contributing to the eventual breakdown. Those sort of things can pose really strong risks for suicide as well. So I guess that's the most general in terms of the evidence. Then we get into the more kind of proximal, I guess, link between relationship breakdown and suicide, where studies will talk about, you know, relationship breakdown as a stressful life event in the past 12 months or something like that. And often people that have experienced that are up to 2 to 3 times greater risk of suicide. And then I guess at the most, it's hard to describe, but the kind of closest level of the link there between these two things, there's evidence, and this is kind of mainly pertaining to suicide attempt, but where people often say that relationship breakdown or conflict is a direct trigger or often a cause of their ultimate action on suicidal thoughts. So it kind of, yeah, I'm seeing the evidence out there in kind of that, I guess, tiered way, if that makes sense. And yeah, the quality of the evidence kind of varies across the different studies, but yeah, it's pretty clear that there's something going on here. So,
and you mentioned complexity about suicide and then complexity about relationships, and to hear that there is some association between the same risk factors, it's such a big mystery. Like if you look at it from that context, I'm just wondering, like, where does masculinity come into that? I mean, I've read some of the research that you did around masculinity. We had a session at the summit, and there were some discussions that started around masculinity, and some people were like, well, the perception of masculinity is portrayed badly on men. And then there's other people going, well, that perception is actually a protective factor, because by men thinking that they have to be strong, it's keeping them around more. Where do you sit on that? Like, what's your definition of masculinity?
Yeah, sure. I guess in terms of the role that masculinity plays when it comes to relationship breakdown and suicide, to my knowledge, there's actually no studies that have kind of directly looked at the role that masculinity plays there. There's some qualitative work, like based on interviews with men that have gone through recent breakups and things like that, kind of exploring the role that masculinity might play. But it's a very kind of emerging area, I suppose. So something I'm hoping to look into in the PhD. But in terms of masculinity more generally, I think, yeah, it's a bit of a hot topic. It often, you know, it's thrown around a lot with a lot of different adjectives in front of it, from, you know, toxic masculinity to healthy to flexible to whatever. But when it comes down to it, I think masculinity really just refers to any characteristics or qualities or behaviors that are broadly considered consistent or typical of men in whatever different culture or time period or whatever you're looking at. And often, you know, when we talk about masculinity, what people refer to is, you know, so-called traditional masculine norms, which are, you know, all of the different qualities like self-reliance, you know, restricted emotionality, power over women, all these sorts of things. And often that's talked about as masculinity, as though that's kind of the only definition of masculinity, but that's just not true. You know, there's multiple different ways of being a man, and I guess embodying masculinity, particularly nowadays. Like I would argue that the influence of these norms have definitely decreased over time, but I think it's shifted a lot, and it's kind of, I guess, intensified in some particular areas of society. But yeah, it's a hot topic, but I think it's worth having these, you know, difficult, at times awkward conversations around what it actually is, because it's, yeah, it just helps us understand the times where, you know, I guess social expectations on us as men might be potentially limiting our choices and our behaviors, and, you know, potentially impacting our mental health. So
I like that definition that you gave. What I took from it is that it's the masculine, like the male traits that mean something to us. And what I liked about that is that we somewhat have, the way I interpret that was, we somewhat have ownership over our masculinity. And I do like that there's a lot of discussion on masculinity, and that people are like, well, I don't want masculinity to be that I'm just a big guy and I like to just cut up firewood all day for my wife, like Glenn Cotter. But there's other parts too. Like, can a masculine trait be having a therapy session and like counseling your friends, or just being that supportive person that sits and cries with people? So I like that definition of where it comes from. It. We come back to the research and where you're at, and sort of the trajectory on, like, you're doing the reading right now and all the study and stuff, but what have you found out? Like, what's glaringly obviously that it's missing, or that we've done something wrong, or we need to adjust the way that we're going with it? Has anything come up?
Yeah, a lot of things that make me angry and make me glad that I'm doing something in this space, because it just seems that no one else is really, which is not true. There are a lot of people, doing some great work on male suicide, but when it comes to relationship breakdown specifically and really delving into that issue, it just, no one's really doing it. The main issue that I'm seeing in the research at the moment is, and it kind of links with what I was just talking about in terms of wanting to amplify the diversity and difference between men and understand which men are most at risk. In terms of that question, like which men are most at risk of suicide following relationship breakdown, we just don't know, because there's very little good quality evidence actually looking at, within samples of divorced men, for example, what are the factors that differentiate who is likely to experience risk of suicide and who's not. There's a lot of things that are kind of thrown around as potential factors, but there's just very little evidence actually trying to understand who the men are that are most at risk. And I think where that comes from is, I guess, a reliance on what we call a kind of sex differences framework in the research, which is where, when it comes to exploring the gendered elements of what's going on here, a lot of the research often just compares men and women. And that comparison, whilst, fair enough in a lot of ways, in terms of actually trying to understand which men are most at risk and what's going on for men, it really tells us nothing, because it assumes that all men are the same, and indeed all women are the same. And it kind of, yes, it's advantageous in terms of trying to understand broadly what's going on for men versus women. But I think in terms of what I'm interested in and trying to, amplify the diversity and I guess just really communicate that not all men are the same here, and we don't all have the same experiences, and it's the complexity and nuance that we need. I think really trying to focus on the within men difference is a clear gap that I'm hoping to address. And I suppose in terms of what my eventual end goal will be, like I'm hoping to, really answer some of these questions around what the factors are that differentiate men's risk in the event of relationship breakdown, with a view to hopefully develop some kind of program or intervention that really essentially could just sit in between, relationship breakdown and potentially acting on thoughts of suicide for men. Because I think a lot of the factors that are talked about, again, with very little evidence, but it's things like, the loss of social support that comes from a relationship, given, I guess, kind of general average patterns that men might be less inclined to reach out to friends in the event of relationship breakdown and things like that. And also just ideas that, I guess, women, for whatever reason, maybe a bit more connected to other people in their lives relative to men. So, I think developing some sort of intervention and program that, I guess, reduces the shame around relationship breakdown and helps to connect men that are going through a similar experience might be, I'm sure would be worthwhile. Just need the evidence for it first. So,
and then that aligns with the work that most of the men in this network do. Like, we're all sort of working around that. And Glenn Potter, come to you, buddy.
What you're doing, and I'm fascinated with research on this. I'm a suicide prevention counsellor. I'd say probably nearly 50% of my clients are men who have been through relationship breakdown and are currently going through rather complex family law situations.
Yep.
So this is something, and one thing, and we've talked about this before, I'm the only male peer worker in our program up down the East Coast, so I get all the men. And it's interesting that we get a lot of referrals from community mental health with men that are going through serious relationship breakdown and family law that are presenting with great stress and, you know, suicidal ideation. But then we get referrals from community mental health telling us that they're aggressive and that they're hard to deal with, that they have anger issues, and almost telling us that they don't qualify for the post-attempt support because of all of these anger issues. One of the biggest problems with that is there's no bloody services for them down here.
Yep.
There's no men's group, there's no nothing. And at the present point in time, I'm becoming more of a family law counsellor than what I am as a, you know, post-pension support. And I'm working with guys who are just, and I don't know what it is at the moment, but probably 4 out of the 6 are just going through horrendous family law situations that drive anybody to the edge. Purely and simply because of what's involved in the family law court. And I talk about it from personal history when the son was going through it. And, you know, as Todd had said, we'd be bullheads. And I wasn't allowed to go into court with my son because for me to travel to Canberra, I rode a motorcycle up. So I turned up at court wearing leathers. I'm not the most attractive person in the world. Their legal aid objected to me walking in the room because I was intimidating. So my son had to sit in the law court unsupported. But we are seeing so many men going through situations where there's just not the support for them, and you know, not getting access to their children and going through all of these things. So there's massive amounts of distress, worthlessness, hopelessness. So I'm really fascinated to see the research that you're doing and see where it's actually, you know, comes to bear on the ground. Love to have a longer conversation with you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Glenn.
And on that topic, is there a different aspect for men who end up in family court for those who don't, or men with children who don't have children?
It is undeniably a factor. I guess to my knowledge, in terms of the evidence that I've seen or am aware of, there doesn't seem to be that much research that actually tries to break it down by, you know, involvement in family court processes. There is, I'm just remembering now, there are a few studies I've seen where, you know, involvement with stressful or perceiving legal proceedings to be stressful is predictive of suicidal ideation during the separation process. So it's undeniably a factor. But yeah, I guess there just needs to be more research focusing on it, because the studies that have found that are pretty small scale, I guess. Not really, I guess, impactful in terms of developing, you know, government policy, trying to prioritize wellbeing programs and things like that.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Glenn. Have you had a Dads in Distress group down that way at all?
No, there's nobody in the area runs anything for men with perceived anger issues. A handful of us try and do what we can on our own. But again, and I know I've said it before, there's just no services down here, mate.
Yeah.
So many of us that are trying to do things on our own, and trying to get to men. And like I'm talking about men ranged between sort of 21 and 50. The other issue that goes with it is normally with the stress of the breakup and that, if there's court or family court involved, you know, they've got court cases coming up that's got, you know, AVO, restraining orders against them and real ramifications on their life. And a lot of it's just pushes them past. Now, some of these court cases are going on for 18 months, 2.5 years. Yeah, and it just builds and builds and builds. And so it's very real, and I see it a lot, and it angers me at times.
I might move us on. We've got a couple of other hands up, but yeah, it's a really obviously a key point that's well
Yeah.
noted. Yeah, John.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Glenn, DIDs are expanding. They've just got some new round of funding, so maybe I'll have a chat with just see what their plans are down south. The problem is you need a key person to commit to setting up and running it, and that's always been a problem because this stuff is voluntary, and men are volunteering in this space. It's not a common thing, as we know. Yeah, thanks, Michael. I just have a couple of questions, mate, around kind of the nature of research. For a start, does it shock you that I'm, pretty and like over hearing about research, right? Like, there's like almost like every forum and every symposium and every gathering seems to be you guys there. Like I get the value of research and participated and all that stuff, but there seems to be this preponderance of information about it, research, and all the energy and acknowledgement seems to be going to research, and not how is that translating into action? Like what do I know more as a result of, say, the work of Movember and Black Dog, right? And I've seen some of the stats, say $15 million on the community toolkit for Black Dog, and $30 million in Movember in the last 10 years working on masculinity and updating the work with Zach and the guys updating the practitioner kits and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the stats have gone up horrendously at times. So when do we change that direction, and how?
Yeah, it's a big question. To answer your question, it doesn't shock me because
Sorry about that. Sorry about being predictable.
No, not at all. I get equally as frustrated as you at times when absurd amounts of money are thrown at things that don't eventuate real change. And I think it's a fair enough argument to question, whether money should continuously go into research or be funneled more into services. Glenn's talking about the severe lack of services in his area.
Yeah.
But I suppose without research and without understanding, what works to help people keep people safe, then we won't necessarily know what services are needed and what's needed in particular areas. I know that there's heaps of evidence showing what does work, but
so and sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to focus on that point because this is a lived experience forum, right? So research keeps sort of listening to lived experience. So we talk about divorce, for instance. I know there's some studies overseas. I've seen the figure 8 times more likely to have suicidal ideation going through divorce, right? That was the Canadian American study, right? And that's massive. But if you ask, like Glenn just said it, half his people, right? If you ask me, I'd say the same thing. 40 to 60% of men I talk to are getting. The interesting thing is that's not, other blokes on the ground would say that's not the only factor. Right. So, how do you then sort of file in when you're talking empirical studies? How do you then qualify, say, the nature of allostatic load? Right. So, over and over again, a man has had a setback. We talk about masculinity. Right. What is the source of shame? Is it one thing? Is it multiple things? Is it where he's positioned in, his socioeconomic space? Is it hierarchical? Does it relate to his, all of those kind of things, right? How do we predict who's the risk factors are laid out, but how do we predict? I can't tell which bloke I'm talking to is likely to have a go as opposed to a bloke who's just thinking about it and then won't go. And they are exactly the same in most things, but I still can't identify them, even though we're talking and we're having that same discussion about those risk factors.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is your research going to sort of tell me that?
I hope so. Bloody well hope so. In terms of what you were just talking about, in terms of, when it comes to relationship breakdown and suicide, is socioeconomic status of factor, what's the source of shame, all that sort of stuff. There's some evidence I'm aware of that, you know, men of lower socioeconomic position are at marginally higher risk. In terms of the shame element, there's some studies I'm aware of that talk about both trait, which is, I guess, more like a dispositional tendency to experience shame, versus state shame, so shame that's specifically tied to the breakup or separation. Both of those things kind of coalesce to increase men's risk of suicidal thoughts during separation. But I guess just more broadly than that, you know, we've 50 years of dedicated suicide prevention research has largely led to an ability to predict death by suicide that's no better than chance. So we are just not doing enough to really understand what are the factors that differentiate who is going to, you know, act on suicidal thoughts in the event of various risk factors. So I totally hear you, and I agree that we're not doing enough. And I just, I hope that the work I do can move us some way in the right direction.
So I want to throw in a quick point here as well. I'll come to you, Bob, in just a moment. For me, it's about policy. Actually, there's a massive lack of policy direction from governments and even lead like peak bodies. So even Suicide Prevention Australia, which has written a paper or a policy or a position statement around male suicide and the need to act, they've got that position paper, but it doesn't impact on all the other position papers they then write. So a plug for the Australian Men's Health Forum, who are going in Victoria for the current strategy being developed there, or new suicide prevention policy, and also at a national level. So they're running a campaign which will be sort of building up out of the conference next week in Canberra as well, to really try and, you know, take it to that policy level, because we've had a bit of success in Tassie. We've lobbied pretty hard and we've managed to get some implementation focus on male suicide. It's actually pretty amazing what's come into the strategy, but you don't really see that anywhere else. Maybe Queensland, I think, has started to as well. But Bob, you've had your hand up there.
Bear with me, it's be a bit difficult to explain. For me, I live in a feeling universe, not a thinking universe. For me, thinking is the weapon of mass distraction. How I healed myself was through my feelings, discharging all the trauma that I absorbed in the first 7 years of my life. And my relationships up until I did that healing work, and it's part of our socio-cultural conditioning, is just imagine during my developmental years, there were holes in my soul that I could not fill, and the relationships I got into was with a woman that could fill those holes in my soul, and I could fill in the holes in her soul, if you like. And so all of my relationships really were based on codependency, not interdependency. And I've spent over much longer than 20 years working on this. But I realized that looking back, because I didn't have my developmental needs met, and it's in our culture, you know, you look at any country and western song, or my life is empty without you, babe, you my world, you are my night and day. It is as if there's somebody else out there that's going to fix me. And the realization was that I had to do the work to fill the holes in my own soul, so that I could stand in a solid belief of my authentic self. And so I think I was absolutely gutted every time, I broke up with somebody, I realized that I was never taught how to love. I wasn't in love with them. I was addicted to them. I was in a state of addiction and not unconditional love and acceptance. And so I'm just so pleased to actually have done that work now. And
Yeah.
it's just like what I radiate, I create. So, you know, I am now radiating wholeness. I've still got things I'm working on, personal growth is a journey, not a destination. But I'm reclaiming my belief in me was the most powerful thing I've had. And can I share it for about a minute or two, or
Briefly, because I know we want to get
okay,
give Michael an opportunity to ask us some more questions as well.
yeah. Well, this is how I reclaim the belief in myself using John Bradshaw's work. I was going backwards and forwards to my childhood, heaps and heaps in the 90s, and I recall my first instance of when I stopped believing in me, and I was about 4 3/4 years old. I got up on a Sunday morning, brushed my hair, combed my teeth, put on a red t-shirt, and bounced down to breakfast. And Mum said, Bobby, go upstairs and put on your blue t-shirt. You know you love your blue t-shirt. So I stood up, confused. No, I love my red t-shirt. That's why I put it on. But, you know, Mum's mum, and she's angry. She was very, very violent, and she's about 80 foot tall. So I went up and I put my blue t-shirt on, and that's my earliest recollection of me getting my sense of self from somebody else. And that behavior just extrapolated through my adult life until I went back and healed that wound. But
so thanks, Bob. It's obviously quite a journey to be able to get through these things and find that healing for ourselves. I'm going to come to Michael in a moment just to ask us some more questions, because I know hearing from people with lived experiences, I believe that's something that you're looking to be able to do. But Stephen, you had your hand up there for a question as well.
you're muted, Steve.
Sorry, you're muted, yeah.
How's that? Sorry.
That's it.
Got
Yep.
it.
You
Okay.
go, yeah.
So I'll start again, and I'll be very brief. I'm not in the space that everybody else is in. I come to this meeting as a grieving father. My son took his life 4 years ago. And it's interesting listening to the research, or sorry, your aims of research, Michael, and I agree with you. The more we understand about this pandemic of suicide, perhaps we might be able to change it. But I want to go back to a couple of things that we've heard. Firstly, I mean, in Townsville, there are no services. I used to go around, my son suffered from terrible delusions and nightmares, and I'd go around and sit with my son from 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the morning till he'd settled and gone to sleep, get up, and I would then, and he would go to work. And then we do it the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And I had no idea he was about to take his own life, and until it happened. And the other thing that's interesting is this topic of shame, I think, and how it affects people. My family has talked about David's death. And one of the things that we come back to is the fact that he was too embarrassed to say that he was suffering. And when he did, the Townsville University Hospital Service had a flick and tick board and then showed him the door. So in truth, to everybody, and I know you've got your own areas of expertise and you're all very committed, and I think that's great. But my reality is, until any of this makes one jot of difference in changing policy, as was said before, but more to the point, changing actions on the ground so that people who have suicidal ideation are not ticked and flicked, do not have to go to a sterile room with fluorescent lights and people popping in every 5 minutes to check on how they are. And until those services are on the ground, research is pointless because it
Mhm.
will be treated academically. It will be put on the shelf. And when was it that we anointed somebody the Australian of the Year who was a mental health expert, and he was going to lead the charge to improve things, and blatantly bugger all happened for whatever reason, for all the best intents, nothing happened because my son still took his own life.
Mm.
So
Yeah, totally hear you, Stephen. Thanks for sharing that.
sure.
Just to say on that point around, I guess, services and what mental health services could potentially be doing better to kind of meet men on a better level and not, I guess, just show them the door, as you said. A lot of the work that we've been doing in collaboration with Movember and Zach Seidler, who I work with quite closely, is to really just develop training and things like that, so that mental health clinicians are better equipped to detect and respond to distress in men. And I think someone was potentially talking earlier about anger and anger issues and things like that. So we've got specific training for therapists and psychologists and things like that around, seeing anger as not just a man being difficult, as potentially a sign. It's actually talked about in the literature as a symptom of so-called male type depression. So if it's a symptom of depression, then it shouldn't be brushed under the rug and just kind of, I guess, ignored as just a man being difficult. So totally hear you and agree that services need to do better. There's some other work that we're doing at the moment to kind of look broader than the mental health context and just look at men's health services more generally. And I think, the extent to which those services are providing kind of gender sensitive care that is kind of aware of the ways in which men can express distress and things like that. So yeah, I'm incredibly sorry and thankful, that you've shared what you have, Stephen. And yeah, I hope that the work we're doing means that no other father has to go through what you have.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's just such a difficult thing, and I guess part of what we're hoping through networks like this and various other work that we're all doing is that we are creating other opportunities outside the medical and clinical system, such as mentoring men, dads in distress groups, which, can provide actually something which the medical services can't, but that they can refer to. They won't fit for everyone. We're not going to meet every individual who's struggling. It's just that big a problem. We're not going to solve this overnight. But yeah, I think that's a big part of what we're hopefully trying to create. And certainly over the last 5 years or so, there's been a massive increase in the number of grassroots men's groups and organisations that are out there.
Yeah, I wonder, Jonathan, if Michael, have you seen the list of community and social-based men's groups that I think, Jonathan, that's part of the doing it kit, isn't it? Which Terry Cornick and Mr. Perfect has put together, right?
Yep.
And that's like the thousands of men involved in that. That like they're the guys who are keeping like that, keeping blokes walking, right? Because they're having conversations that aren't about risk factors, protect factors. It's having conversations about what the bloke needs now. And I'm sure, we know that, but I keep stumbling over this disconnect between, all those thousands of blokes, right? And we get on the forums, and the last AMHF forum was sensational, and everyone had a good idea, and those blokes are doing amazing work. But none of it's funded. None of it sort of has any kind of structural or systemic approval, right? And any research is ad hoc at best, right? And I'm wondering why there's a disconnect between that, systemic stuff. You know, like I know Zach's the Zach and you guys are the lone voice around sort of you know, men's research and stuff. Why is that the case?
I think it's a tough question. I think for a long time, services have just, because there's a certain amount of, I guess, privilege and prestige that comes with being something like a health practitioner, you know.
Right.
And I think, you know, for various different reasons, that has potentially prevented people kind of looking under the hood and seeing whether or not services are actually getting it right and doing the right thing. So yeah, I think that has potentially gotten in the way of research that really tries to look at outcomes, for example, and try and understand, you know, clinical quality and even just like patient satisfaction and things like that. I know, you know, organizations like Lifeline, for example, like they only now are starting to focus more, to my knowledge anyway, on actually trying to understand outcomes and things that might differentiate kind of services that work for people and then
Yeah,
don't do so much.
forgive me if I don't, you know, hold my breath waiting for that one. Right. So
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. Just so okay, just the last, and I understand. You know, the boys know that I'm a hog, so sorry. But the one thing I'm interested in is a subjective measure. So like we started the meeting with a SUD score, right? Subjective unit of distress, right? Which is cool. It works. Everyone understands it. It's like you don't have to explain it. You just say, "What's a score? How you feeling? 0 to 10." Right? There's like, you know, it's an amazing tool that has no real sort of need to sort of go into a long and explained sort of background as to why it works. I can't work like why haven't you know? Is it possible? You know, and you're the you know like you're the probably the right bloke to ask. Is it possible to develop a standard unit of you know, like a temperature of, you know, that combines you know, the risk and protective factors and sort of and then is a subjective unit of community care or something like that. So, you know, like a on the ground group can say, hey, we're doing 15 units of community care, right? That involves 15 minutes of conversation or 20 minutes of, you know, hand holding or, you know, 300 sausages cooked, whatever the, you know, elements that go into making it up is, and then everyone has a common measure. So you're like a little group, like, we've got Lifeline could say they do this, and then, but we can get a little group like, Man Walk or something can come up and say, well, the Lismore group are doing 7 units of this, right?
Have you ever thought about being a lived experience researcher, John? Because I think you've got a lot of awesome ideas, and it's something that we're, like Origin, I know, are focusing a lot more on, is actually employing people with lived experience to be a researcher. So come on down.
Mate, my doors have been shut in my face constantly, but that may be more about like the ugliness that I'm, when I, peering through the window, right? But I dream about being a lived experience researcher. But the idea is like, they're smarter. You guys, you're the smart one, right? So like, all we want, we just want to have conversations that care, right? So.
Absolutely. I think I understand what you're saying. And I think, that would be incredibly impactful, like a measure that actually gets at the community, or I guess individual specific things that are going to be the best determinants of how someone is actually going, on a given day. These are the things that might actually be, better predictors of whether or not someone's going to act on suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And my thinking,
things like, are they married or not?
Yeah, exactly. And it's my thinking is we don't need to turn their life around. That can be clinical, or that can be a care plan or long-term plan. All we need to do is anchor them for a day or a couple of days, right? So, and that whole process of measuring, what is going to anchor someone through helpless, hopeless, and worthless. Because Glenn just needs a toolkit that says, okay, let's talk about relationships. Let's talk about, what is the simplest, easiest step to take that anchors someone for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, right? Is it a conversation? Is it 20 minutes of hand holding? Is it a hug? Is it, and then just putting a rating there and making say, okay, we can do that. And then we can measure the effectiveness of groups on the ground. And then they have a currency against, when it comes to funding, right? Lifeline get all the money, right? Because they've got 3,000 calls a day, right? How does that line up against, 10 conversations with blokes who are about to walk, to take a long walk?
Great questions, John. Michael,
Sorry, mate.
You. What's some stuff like? What are you wanting to know? Like, is there stuff that you'd like to put to us to discuss?
Yeah, thank you. I guess firstly, I'm just curious as to whether different members in the group, if your lived experiences of suicide in whatever form has featured relationship breakdown at some point. The research that I'm doing, I want it as much as possible to have the voice of lived experience come through. So if people are open to talking with me at various different stages as I go through this, just to kind of get a sense check and see what you think about what I'm finding, and then I would love to do that. So just wanted to kind of put that out there if people are keen. And I guess more specifically, what I'm interested in is this whole idea around social support in the aftermath of relationship breakdown, because that seems to be the factor that's coming up most often as the kind of go-to reason explaining why men seem to be at such high risk. And again, often it comes back to this whole sex differences thing, and the explanation being that, women are just going to reach out to their friends and have more friends around them, and men are just not going to have that. And that's why, men are at risk of suicide here, and Bob's your uncle. It's as simple as that. I don't think it's as simple as that, because I think one of the biggest barriers to men getting support in the aftermath of relationship breakdown isn't the absence of people, it's the lack of skill in the people knowing what to say and knowing how to provide support and how to kind of actually sit with them in that severe distress and help them through it. So I'm wondering if people who have experienced relationship breakdown that has potentially contributed to their suicidality, how did people go about trying to support you? If there were people in your support network, what were the sort of things that people said? What was helpful? What wasn't? Because I'm just really interested in the idea of some sort of intervention that might upskill the people around men to better be able to really reach them and provide support.
Great questions. I'll go first. Like, for me, I love for us to move away from the notion that as a support person, you need to fix things for people.
Yeah.
And that, we know that's a barrier, because people are like, oh, I don't know how to fix your problems. It's like, you don't have to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably for me, like, one of the biggest things that I had from my support people was just the word we. How are we going to get through that? We are going to, I'm here with you. It wasn't so much what they were saying, it's just the sitting and just being with, and not letting you forget, because it's often people will be there to support early on, but then it's a week later, 2 weeks later, the people who actually follow up. A lot of people be like, oh yeah, I touch base with them, I sent them a text, that's it. And they're like, oh, they didn't respond, send them another one.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tynan. It reminds me of some, I think one of Brene Brown's TED Talks, where she kind of is talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And empathy being all about just sort of actually connecting with some part of yourself that shares the experience that the other person is going through. And it's not like, it's hard for a lot of people to do, to really, like, if they're not currently going through a breakup, to really just channel that intense distress. But as you say, it doesn't take much to really, like, you don't have to have any words really beyond just saying, I see you and I totally get what you're going through.
It's something about Adam Lerner Lane talks about empathy not going far enough.
Mhm.
Right. So, with Brené talking about empathy being where you touch something that in yourself that is being, experienced by someone else. I would propose compassion is a more appropriate driver for men, because I define compassion as empathy plus care plus action.
Mm.
So, so in my situation, so as in my case, my breakdown of my relationship was death, right? So, and there are a couple of blokes who stood out because grief and distress, and my conversations with blokes going through this, they're exhausted, they're focused, they're obsessed, right? And that to the exclusion of doing self-care things as well as normal things like normal life maintenance stuff. So that really takes it out of you. So you need to help them, sort of let go of that taunt, control. And to do that, there's things that men can do to support a bloke that takes pressure off.
Mm.
So look at the periphery, right? You're not going to try and fix the grief of his loss, right? Because that's something intrinsic. So what external issues can be supported? So, two of the things that stand out, even to this day, even as long ago as my grief was, right, was a bloke. I came home after attending to something, and a mate was in my garden. And he was a landscaper, and he just come in, he tied it up mode and, placed mulch and stuff. And I go, what are you doing? He said, man, I just need a tidy up, right? Just gave, shook his hand and he left. He didn't ask anything of me. He just didn't, to that. And I just remember being completely supported by that act, right? Like, it's not, he didn't say, oh, you're broken, John, you need to be fixed. He said, hey, mate, you're busy. Let me take care of something that needs to be done.
Mm.
And there's a couple of other instances of that. And I just think we forget about, we focus on the wound, but, blokes can fight through wounds if we take a little bit of the pressure off the rest of the stuff they need to do.
Mm.
And I just think that's an area that sometimes men can do, but don't really know how to, because one of the questions you get from blokes trying to support other men is, I didn't know what to do.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great comments, John. Love the comments that you've shared with us, Bob, in the chat as well. I know you got your hand up. I'm just mindful of time, and I'm really keen to.
Just a quick one then.
Sorry?
Just a quick one then.
Very quick, yep.
Yeah. A quick tool that I picked up from the support groups and the counselling sessions that I've run, and it was a really effective step for healing, was, face to face, eyeball to eyeball, the person sharing their wound, facing their demons. And for me, my posture is one just of loving acceptance and validation of the reality that they are sharing. I think that's a basic human need, to have their reality validated. Not saying you're crazy or, get with the program, mate. No, it was all about acceptance and validation, because for me, we're all sovereign, unique, and equal. It's going to be different every time, but I really feel that acceptance and validation is fundamental.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. That's excellent. Michael, before we finish, I'd love to get a bit of a sense from you about what inspires you in general, maybe if there's something specific about the work, but in general as well. And with the insights that you're getting and the lived experience that you've shared as well, how do you look after yourself? What do you do to ensure that you're staying on top of your game?
Yeah, sure. Just to say thank you for the answers to the questions I had. That's all really insightful and giving me a lot to think about. What inspires me, primarily what I'm feeling very inspired by right now is just the amount that everyone's shared this evening, and just like these sorts of conversations are literally why I do the work that I do. It's just so insightful and inspiring and just incredible, like the resilience that you guys have in getting through everything that you've been through, and still, you know, showing up to support other people and putting others before yourselves, I think is just incredible. So that's one of the biggest, I guess, inspirations for me. And in terms of how I keep going, I'm not quite sure sometimes, because it's bloody hard work a lot of the time. But as I said, exercise is a really crucial thing for me. Like, I notice a really tangible difference in days where I, you know, if it's raining or something and I can't be asked riding to work, I'll drive, and like sitting in traffic as opposed to riding my bike for half an hour. Like, it's just, the day is ruined if I've sat in traffic for 40 minutes on the way. So yeah, that's a huge one for me. But also music. I'm hugely into music, mainly kind of electronic music, anything you can dance to, really. And I taught myself to DJ at the start of last year, so I've played a few gigs around town. So that's, yeah, they talk about like getting into a flow state, and there's nothing that puts me in a flow state more than putting on some techno and and DJing. So yeah, that's me.
That's great. I wasn't
Thanks, Michael.
expecting the DJ part. Yeah, Michael, I'd really just like to honour you and just thank you for the discussion tonight, and thank you for your open and honesty as well around like lived experience, what drives you. And yeah, look, I hope that we can, as a network, can help support your research and really provide that lived experience perspective that truly is valuable. And it's great to hear like your reflection on sort of what inspires you. We haven't had one of these meetings where I haven't walked away and felt inspired just to share the space with the men and just have these conversations. So yeah, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks again for having me. As I said, it's, yeah, being quite early in my, I guess, career still. Like, I really appreciate being given the platform and the you know, the space to talk to all you awesome folks. So yeah, thanks again for having me along.
Thanks, Michael. Just conscious a couple of people haven't spoken and maybe would like to make a closing comment or two. While you do that, if you want to, I'm going to chuck a couple of links in the chat. One is to the registration page for the How to Help a Mate Doing It Tough, very short webinar, sort of half an hour, 45 minutes on Friday at 10 o'clock Sydney time. And then the second link will be to a Facebook post where, if you're able to share that post or copy the image and share that promoting the same workshop, we'd really appreciate that. But yeah, any closing comments from anybody else around the room?
Is it okay to give Michael my phone number, because I've got some stuff that I can share with him, because I move around in a lot of men's circles, Menergy, all that kind of stuff. So I hear a lot about this stuff. So
do you have the have you got a chat? Can you see?
Yeah, I just,
you can actually select it just to share with him. I'm sure it's no big deal to share
I'm
with
quite happy to
everyone.
share my number with all of you.
Yeah, well, just on that point, like, as if it's okay, Tynan and Jonathan, I might put my email in the chat for everyone if I'm allowed to do that, because if anyone wants to, like, I think a couple of people are interested in some papers or like research in particular areas. So if people have questions about things, just feel free to get in touch anytime.
Yeah,
that
would
busy.
be good. That would be good. Yeah, just that would be great. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Fairley.
Paul, let's come to you.
I was just going to ask around the vulnerabilities of men's sexual health, as maybe as they're maturing and they might have prostate cancer or prostate issues or other health issues that might be affecting their sexual health with their relationship, and that then questions their masculinity.
Paul, to my knowledge, like I'm not familiar with research in that space specifically, but I know some colleagues of ours in Canada at the University of British Columbia have done a lot of work with guys with prostate cancer around, you know, how that does a lot of great qualitative work, I should say, like, you know, interviewing guys about their experiences and things like that. And it definitely has a huge impact, you know, impacting their sexual health and then flowing on to kind of that masculine part of their identity. So I wish I could say more about how it impacts and the kind of complexity there, but it definitely does. So that experience is definitely reflected in the research. And I'm happy to find some key articles and send them through if you're interested.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for dropping your email into the chat there. Everybody,
Sure.
if you want to grab his email, it's in there for you. Any other closing comments?
I might just say I'm on Twitter as well, so people can connect with me there too, if that works.
Just to let you know as well, Stephen had bailed out of the chat. It was getting a bit much, but I've checked in with him and he's okay. He's got his wife there with him. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's good to hear.
All right.
John, pass our